Hi, everybody. Think we should move on so we can move to our next workshop with Dr. Brown. Are you there, Dr. Brown? Okay, great. It's a lot of talking. Sure, you have to kind of freshen up and relubricate. I want to remind everyone, and I hope you all received the presentations, Dr. Brown's presentations electronically. They are also on our website. In addition, we sent the information from Princeton Review, both if you are applying for college or if you are preparing for the MCATs. That information is very, very important. So please review it. And we hope to keep you up on and add you to our other list so that other opportunities as they come up. The other thing I just want to remind you that PMF also, besides mentoring and networking and workshops, when we have the funds, we try to do scholarships and stipends and special projects and include students that are at least in the area or able to work on a special project and maybe provide them a stipend. So that's a little bit more about PMF. And with that said, let's move to Dr. Brown's next workshop presentation. Thank you.
So we talked about different fields in medicine, and it's kind of a broad stroke understanding of medicine, but we know that the reason why you're here today is because you're along the process of getting to that point. Like you are somewhere along that pathway, and that journey itself is unique, right? Every single last person that's on here has a story to tell, has some sort of narrative that makes them a viable candidate for being a physician. My job today is to talk to you about how to extract that narrative, how to get that story out there and deliver it in a way that is compelling. When they ask you to deliver a personal statement, what does that mean? So how do we find and develop that statement so that you can be as effective as possible in your candidacy? So again, I like to use images. What is a personal statement? Like, how do you describe it? And I mean, I can see that you can read this portion right here. I'll read it, but then I'll go a little bit deeper, right? So it's a written description of one's achievements, their interests, etc., included as part of an application for a job or to an educational program or anything of the like, right? But this is kind of a very cursory understanding of what a personal statement is. It is not just that. It is more so your narrative and a way that you articulate your desire to be something through your narrative. So I want you to understand that it is more so than just writing something that says, this is what I've accomplished in life and this is why you should select me, but more so who you are, what you believe in, why you're a good fit for that role, and how that's going to help you to fulfill some higher purpose or higher drive. All right. So when I think about personal statements, I want you to know that there is a certain depth to it, right? You can't just write these things. They have to be expressive. They have to have the ability to take somebody who's never known you and has probably 10 minutes max, if not, closer to like 5 minutes to kind of learn about you. They have to understand who you are, where you came from, what your struggles are, what your abilities are, what sculpted you, that has to be articulated in the statement. Now, I say it's both subjective and objective. What that means is in that statement, you have to give facts. Like you have to give somebody truth and things that are verifiable, but you also can paint those facts and pivot them in a way that makes sense to you, right? So that's the subjective element. But the objective part is it happened. You can go somewhere, you can see it. There's evidence of it. The part that most folks don't think about is it has expert opinion, and you're that expert. That is why you have the greatest ability ever to write this story. No one can write it more perfectly than you can. And it's the preamble to you. That means that Once I finish reading this statement, I should feel like I've been introduced to the world's greatest candidate. I should feel like I know you a little bit, like I could sit on your mom's couch. That's how I feel. It is the introduction that gets me in the doorway to say, hey, all right, I know this candidate a little bit. So think about it that way, and I promise you, you will spend the appropriate time trying to construct it. So we ask, like, how do people use these statements? For the most part, they are a requirement to enter any major field of professional, a professional career, right? Medicine, dentistry, law. I can't think of a specific field that when you are trying to get into the school, they don't require a personal statement. But on top of that, there's other uses for it, right? So if you have a scholarship application, they usually want to know a statement of purpose, or they give you a prompt and they ask you to like articulate your idea around something. And many people bend their statements to those prompts. If you're going to if you're going to apply for things like submitting an application, not application, submitting a publication, they may ask you to give a statement of purpose or some type of personal statement so that they understand the author, as well as when you are asking other people to vouch for you. So trying to get letters of recommendation from instructors, giving them a personal statement may help them better understand you and your intentions. So it's good to have these things. I use my personal statement pretty often. I've used it for speaking engagements. I've used it when trying to approach different boards. So I encourage you to build a statement that speaks to who you are and it's effective. But its major job is that it answers a question for people, right? They want to know why you want to do this. Why do you want to be a physician? We talked about it last time. I kind of mentioned it casually, but now we're really getting into the granular elements of it, right? How do I know that you'll be a good doctor? What have you done in life that tells me that you are in alignment with this profession? And how are you going to tell me that, right? The cool thing is this story is tailored to you, and it can be as fine as and narrow as you want it to be. It's just more so an exercise in you figuring out what you're willing to share and be vulnerable with, and how you construct that struggle or that story or that narrative or that triumph to make the point that you would be a good doctor, right? There's a lot of reflection involved in these statements. So I say that especially now where we have to be very mindful of how writing and words pull our emotions and make us relive things. So think about that in writing a statement, you may drum up some things that you've kind of like stowed away for a while, particularly because that stuff may cause some pain or because it may be unsightly. Now, it doesn't always have to be like a story about somebody dying, but sometimes it's failures that you've encountered that you're not happy to speak about again. But you have to bring that to the forefront because you want to draw a reader in. You want them to feel like they are reading something as captivating as a Marvel comic, right? But make sure that at the end of the day, you are goal-oriented in how you write. So it's not just about, let me take you through this really cool, J.K. Rowling story. I want to know at the end, what are you trying to do? You want to be a doctor. Why? Like, make sure you explain that. So I usually give this talk and I speak about the power of your narrative and how you can slowly craft this narrative that commands the attention of the reader. And these 3 bullet points usually help me to build that, right? Premise, anchor, pivot points. When you establish a premise, what we're talking about here is making sure that there is one takeaway idea or concept that lets someone know exactly the purpose of you writing this, right? I need to know why you're a physician. Have it in a very succinct statement. That is your premise, right? So if I was like, you give me a statement and I said, all right, I'd like to be a physician because I believe that through medicine, you can change the way that people think and interact with one another, and then ultimately improve the well-being of society. I just made that up, but that might be my premise. It's enough of a premise for me to say I can build stuff out of that, right? You have anchors. Your anchors are traits and characteristics that make you strong, that make you feel like you are an apt pupil or an apt physician. So those anchoring points off that same premise that I said, I don't remember entirely, but you start to think about things like being steadfast, being a good problem solver, the fact that you're good with your hands, you can communicate well. Like these are anchors, these are things that you have, or you're compassionate, that make you a strong, that give you the DNA of a good physician. And then finally, finding those pivot points. So these are those inflection points in your conversation or in your narrative where they are a significant fork in the road. And if it wasn't for this particular thing, you might have gone left, but you chose to go right. Or there was something that had multiple decision points and you went forward. Like these are pivot points, and they are like really the parts of a story that are like the turn. They give somebody a feeling that they are invested in reading it. So think about your pivot points. An example would be like, I was failing out of school, and then I decided to go see someone who helped teach me how to do a particular style of learning, and then I started to do well. That is a pivot point. Or, hey, I was working in a menial job, and then somebody came in and said I could do so much better, and then they gave me a biochemistry book, and I thought it was interesting. Pivot point. So think about those. Soft flexes versus hard flexes. I like, if you've ever watched Jalen and Jacoby on ESPN, they talk about boss moves, soft move or boss move. This is kind of my version of that. A soft flex versus a hard flex. So a soft flex is an indirect mention of a strength, right? So when I talk about soft flexes, let me start off by saying that you have to master the ability to do both in your conversation and as well as in your writing. Soft flexes and hard flexes are in the anatomy of being a self-advocate. And I say that because in most situations, along this pathway, you're going to have to be a big advocate for yourself. And that means knowing how to do soft flexes and hard flexes. Let me take a sip of water. So a soft flex, an example would be mentioning that, I remember learning that particular concept while I was on the board of this biology organization. You're not outwardly saying I was the president of the biology organization. You're saying indirectly, like, oh, that was a really cool thing that I once saw and learned about while I was the board of a board president. So it is indirectly bringing the major point. The point that you're trying to make isn't that I've had exposure to this issue. You're trying to bring the point up that I was the president of this board. That is a soft flex. Whereas a hard flex is outwardly saying, like, I spent 3 summers as the chief TA for X, Y, and Z. And because of that, I interacted with hundreds of students. That is a hard flex. You're saying this experience is so significant that I'm not going to nuance it. I'm going to say it outright and lead with it because it has something to do with what I'm trying to prove. Both of them, if you learn how to use these masterfully, I promise you, it'll take you far. Acknowledge and address weaknesses with authority. So what I mean, not with authority, like to people who are more superior, but with authority, meaning like with a degree of commanding of those weaknesses, right? So people will always say, hey, turn your weakness into a strength in a paper. Sometimes that is okay. Sometimes it appears like you're trying to make excuses for things. So I want you to be very savvy in how you navigate this. If you have a weakness in your history, a weakness in your application, do not leave it out. Like, don't just, because the worst thing that could happen is they find out about it and then they ask you, why didn't you say this? Or they feel like something doesn't add up and altogether they don't give you the opportunity to explain it. In your narrative, you can explain it. You can take the affirmative stance, the authority on it. You can get it out in front of it, right? And say, this happened. So think about how you can say that in a way that shows that you learned from your mistake. Not the fact that you made the mistake and you're embarrassed by it, or the fact that you made the mistake and you try to cover it up, but the fact that you made it and it became a learning experience for you. And out of that, you grew. So talk about that growth. So I got another picture here. It's an old movie named Boomerang. This is Eddie Murphy and a man who recently passed, John Witherspoon. And he's talking about how his belt matches his shirt, and his shirt matches the insides of his jacket, like the lining. And he got all these different things. And he said, you got to coordinate. And so with this, I talk about layering and coordinating, right? In building your narrative. Layering to me means with each successive paragraph, you're kind of adding on another layer of who you are, of your personality, of the things that you bring to the table. Like there is a continuity through it, and all you're doing is just like putting on more, so that it embellishes and creates a degree, like a complete aesthetic of who you are. And coordinating it means that you can't just bring some things that are arbitrary to the table. The things that fit in this narrative have to make sense. So don't just layer on something that doesn't match. Layer on stuff that matches. Put the belt with the shirt with the liner, and all of it have the mushroom pattern. That's coordinating. So that's how you have to think about it when you're writing. And then there's the boomerang effect. Hence why I use the picture of the boomerang. Everything that you say has to boomerang back to either an anchor or a premise. So as you're constructing those paragraphs, the sub points that you make, the experiences that you're using, they should boomerang back to one of those things that you're trying to draw out as major themes in your writing, in your personality, in your narrative. So I'll use some examples of those things just quickly. So an example of layering and coordinating would be if I'm telling you in one part of the statement that, you know, I like to do service. I like community service. And I start off by my first paragraph experiences talking about how I worked as a child. I worked in my church to help the elderly. And out of that, I grew more interested in working with people and seeing the illnesses that they had. Then in the next one, I layer and coordinate and say, well, then as a college student, I started an organization that started to do these food drives, and we would often go in the homes of elderly people and da-da-da-da-da. You see what I mean? So layered and coordinated. It built upon a premise. And the boomerang effect is that each one of these, you're hearing me talk about serving somebody other than myself. And so if my anchor is, I am a servant, a leader, a servant leader, then that means now that in each paragraph, I'm talking about either a leadership quality or my ability to serve. That is how you kind of craft that concept. All right, so these writing structures I like to talk about because for most of us, we don't like. I'm cheating. I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm cheating because my mother, you know, my mother passed, but she was an English professor, like English teacher, not a professor. She was a high school 9th and 10th grade English teacher. And so that is around the time when people have to start doing more complex writing in general. And this is what I've lived most of my life understanding was like these writing structures and how to write. So there's a natural, this conversation is extremely natural to me. So I'm telling you that when I break down these writing structures, it's because, not that I assume that you don't know it, but because I understand that for the most part, we don't put words and phrases and things to define it. We've seen it and we've been exposed to it, but we just don't know it that well from a literary sense. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking about some of these things. Cool. All right. Hold on. That's perfect. So the first one is going to be prompt statement, support, and restate. This is a very easy, I would say, most common way that people do this. Their job is to say what happened in the prompt, like take the prompt, make sure that you come up with a complete or cohesive idea, like a thesis, and then provide support around what you think, and then restate what you said in a way that seems like it's succinct. So an example would be if in the prompt it says, like, you know, explain why you believe that you are, how your role in medicine will advance care for the future. And then your statement has to answer that. Then you build support in your body of your essay, and then finally you restate at the end what that prompt is and how you're going to weave it together. So most people like to use a variety of things to do this. It can be a quote, so you can lead with a strong statement. Right now, just to let you guys know, if you're writing statements, a very, very good quote that people have been throwing all around is about Good Trouble from John Lewis, the representative that passed, who is a civil rights activist. His quote on Good Trouble and Necessary Trouble, you've heard stated multiple times, especially if you paid any attention to the talks of this past week, right? So think about those quotes. You can lead with that, or you can lead with an anecdote, like a little small story, but don't make the story half a page. Yeah, the anecdote is specifically a small story. So think about that as ways to lead in. The other thing is that statement has to be affirmative, right? So not passive. If you know what I'm saying, let me see you do a thumbs up if between affirmative and non-affirmative. Okay, so I see some heads shaking. All right.
Thumbs up.
Perfect. Thank you. Man, dog, if you talk to me, I talk back. All right. So affirmative is a tone that sounds more, I would say, sure of itself. So if I told you we were looking for something in, let's say you asked me, Italo, I'm thirsty. What do you got to drink? And I tell you, there could possibly be something in the refrigerator. That would make you want to say, I'm cool. I'm going to go and get me something to drink somewhere else. But if I said, look, I have an ice cold Coca-Cola waiting in the refrigerator for you, that is an affirmative tone. I've said it directly. So now let me do it in terms of a writing statement. If I said in my statement, the reason why I would like to be a physician is because at the end of the day, I believe that I may be able to help as many people as possible. It's a whole lot of mights and maybes, rather than saying, I believe that everyone has a capacity to care. As physicians, our job is to be leaders in that. And I identify strongly with it. It's an affirmative statement. I'm not leaving anything up to question. I'm telling you where I stand, what I believe in. All right. So that's how you have to think about affirmative tone. And at the end, you just recap it. Cool. Let's keep it rolling. So second structure is what I like to call the Marvel structure. I'm going to start naming these things. Like the first one, I would call it probably like your essay structure, standard essay. The second one, I would call it a Marvel, right? Because I don't know who in the world does not enjoy Marvel movies. I enjoy them to the nth degree. I'm talking about like anyone, any era of Marvel, I've enjoyed it thoroughly. And I think that most people enjoy it because of its classic story arcs. Like we love the origin stories. We love the way that they create this huge character arc and they pull people in and it like weaves in at the end of the day. It's like, oh, this is super sad and amazing at the same time. And I'm cheering for somebody. I don't even know why. Right. So that is what this way is. It's using the classic story arc, right? Setting, rise, climax, fall, resolution. Every story we've ever heard from the beginning of time has had these elements, right? Setting, rise, climax, fall, resolution. Think about it. Any one you're talking about, Icarus flying close to the sun, has those same things. Garden of Eden has those same things. Like any major story that you've ever heard of. Let's talk about Iron Man, right? Iron Man setting. Bratty kid grows up, dad dies. He feels like he hates his dad. And all of a sudden starts becoming a billionaire playboy. Rise, he gets really, really good at what he does. And then all of a sudden he gets kidnapped, and then in this period of solitude decides to fight for something nobler than himself. Climax, he becomes a superhero, literally saving the world multiple times. Fall, they disband. He faces enemies that he can't do anything around. Resolution, he gives himself up. Sorry if I spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't seen the movies. My bad, but it's actually your bad if you haven't seen them. So I'm not going to be sorry. At any rate, the resolution is how that ends out, how it plays. And you can think of your life similarly, right? And every resolution doesn't have to end in some type of like tragedy. It can end as I've accomplished trying to be the person that I've always aspired to be, or I've come to the point where I can write confidently about my failures and still work through them to be the type of doctor, because I know my patients are going to struggle and I know what that feels like. Like, you know what I mean? Like you have to be able to write these things in a way that are compelling. So major points, as I said, consistent story and plot is throughout that thing. And you arrive at the resolution that kind of has this ability to solve a question that the reader is having throughout, right? You want to know where this person is going. You want to know the story. And that resolution brings closure to it, and they leave feeling a sense of completion. All right. Third one is, I call it 3 major qualities, examples, and synthesize. So this is probably what I would consider for me, the easiest way to approach a personal statement. Identify 3 things that you like about yourself in the context of being a physician. 3 things that you think that on your worst day you could bring to the table, right? And then figure out how that makes you a good clinician, how that would make you a good physician, right? And now think about your examples in life where you've shown those characteristics. At the end, talk about all of them together, weave them in. So the opening, as I said, it usually talks very blatantly about these qualities, and they're large qualities. So they can't be things like, I am smart. Like that's not going to help. Like everybody who's writing this thing is smart. Everybody on here figured out Zoom in the last few months. So we all smart. So I think you got to be more specific about qualities. I would give you an example. Like if you said, I am the type of leader who leads by example. So that is a very huge quality, to lead by example. I am an active listener. I mean, you listen to people's problems, you listen to patients, you listen to all types of other stuff. And then I'm proactive. I'm a self-starter. You don't need to tell me to go, I go. All right, I have my own motor. Those 3 things you can build an entire statement off of. And then you bring life examples in to explain where you have these things. And at the end, you can talk about all 3 of them interchangeably to bring about one cohesive idea. The body that you're supposed to do is your entire chance to cite those experiences. If you're going to tell somebody you're proactive, you better have 2 or 3 examples of where you just didn't need anybody to tell you to do something. Please don't turn in this the statement late talking about you proactive. So keep that in mind. But I think that this gives people a better skeleton to work with, because most of you all have already thought about a few things that you do pretty well, and you know enough to say, if I said this on a statement, they would be interested in it. The cool part about it is it gives somebody literally, it's like a slow pitch for an interview. If your entire statement is about 3 things, they're going to figure out a way to investigate more about those 3 things. And you can just prepare yourself to know those 3 qualities and various examples of those 3 qualities. So I would say like there's more, there is more corollaries between how you use the statement when you're taking 3 major qualities and how you present in real life. All right. At any rate, bring them all to a boil, serve up the dish. This is me. All right. Pro tips. So this is where I kind of get into the things that I think are where people, this is every last person on here can write. Let's get that out the way. You can write, you're capable, and you have an ability to share things and emote or express yourself. What we have to work on, and what I'm hoping to do, is to give you ideas and tips and tools to make sure that you whittle yourself down to being like literally a specialist in that. All right, so pro tips. I look at people's applications who did it. When I was in this, I was like, show me your statement. Not because I want to copy it, but because I want to see what it looks like for somebody to write one that was successful, that actually led to the desired end result. So get somebody that you know of who's made it into some type of a program with their statement, and then break it down. You know, go through it like you're watching game film. All right. Speak with a health careers advisor or person who serves on an admissions committee. This to me is if you have the access. And I'm going to blatantly say right now, a lot of when I first made this PowerPoint slide set, it was pre-COVID. So a lot of this stuff has changed to a degree. What I will say is that I think that it might be easier to access these types of advisors now more than ever, because you can do it virtually. So you don't have to wait outside nobody's office like I used to have to. You know, you don't have to sit there and schedule no appointment and be sitting there and be like, all right, man, 10 minutes. I'm gonna wait 10 more minutes. Nah, you can literally just pull up on them on Zoom. All right. But ask them to be critical when you talk to them. Like, ask them, they've seen hundreds of these things. Say, yo, be honest with me. Like, what makes you want to read these statements? What does a good statement sound like to you? So get feedback from them. And it's like getting it straight from the horse's mouth. All right. Steer away from internet advice. Now, I know who I'm dealing with in here. I'm looking at all the team members. Everybody in here is locked in. My brother that's got on the gingham check pink shirt with the bow tie. I mean, with the regular tie. Right. Have you ever looked on the internet at like what people are saying in these chat forums or whatnot about getting into medical school? Right. And sometimes you read something and it seems like it is so far-fetched. You'll be like, oh, they like their statements to come from this perspective, or they like X, Y, and Z. And they're telling you advice, but no one can verify it. No one can verify if what they said worked. So I don't necessarily trust internet advice for things specifically in processes that are this competitive, because what you're going to find is there's a lack of consistency and no one is willing to risk their career on it. You say, hey, if you really believe that your advice is that true, put something up. Prove to me that it was actually worth something. I stand behind everything I'm sharing with you today. So that's why I say, like, you got to be like very critical of internet stuff. And then finally, this is the part that most people don't want to hear. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be straight up with you guys. I even to this day struggle with reading books like for leisure, but you got to read. It sounds so simple, but you got to read. It can't be like, yo, I'm reading Instagram quotes. Like, it's not going to work. You can't be like, yo, I've checked out, a couple blogs. Unless those blogs are written by people like Ta-Nehisi Coates, unless those blogs are written by people who write for The Atlantic, you probably are not giving yourself the best access to, like, I'm talking high grade, elite level writing. You don't have to be an elite writer, but you have to be able to like distinguish elite writing. You have to know how they use their tools, because people who are writing books, You know, they have to get this book published. They have to pass it through multiple sieves and filters. And somebody who has got way better ability to write and read and edit is going through their stuff. And you're like, yo, it took how many rounds for you to publish this one piece of work? So read the book, understand how they build their stories, understand how they craft that statement or whatever they're trying to make. And it gives you an idea of how you set up things, right? One of my favorite authors, Malcolm Gladwell. Every one of his books has the same anatomy. He starts off with some crazy story, and out of it, he pulls out like 2 or 3 moral premises. And then he uses the rest of the book to craft more support for these moral premises. And then his last chapter is usually extremely personal. And then he brings it all together. And then you finish the book and you're like, man, this dude's so smart. And at the end of the day, you're just talking about a dude who spends his time talking to people and hearing their stories. And he tells them to us. So reading his books give you, and I'm not saying that you should go purchase a Malcolm Gladwell book. I'm saying that you read something. You read something that's been published, or you read an article, an op-ed to understand how to craft writing. It helps you to understand how to use your tools. All right, cool. So timeline, this is super important, y'all. This is one of those I would screenshot this. All right, start early. And I know that's super difficult to do, but I'm telling you, like, it doesn't have to be a whole draft when you start early. It could literally just be a brainstorm, a web brainstorm. Like, I love to do, you know, the little make a circle, put an idea in the middle, make some little things from it. I learned that in probably 5th grade, 6th grade. I've been doing that as an adult. Every time I have to come up with an idea, I start with like this little web diagram, an outline, something. Start with that. Go back to it. Write a little bit more. Fill it in. Eventually, you'll see the body of something, right? That first draft that you do, there's a, what do you say? There's a movie called Finding Forrester. Came out like in the early 2000s. It features Sean Connery and this dude named Rob Brown, who also played in Coach Carter. There's a quote in this movie where he says, you write the first draft with your heart, the second draft with your mind. And it always stuck out to me as something that was so profound and super simple. So when you're writing with your heart, you don't care what you're saying. You're just saying it. You're just getting out as much as you can. So you write that first draft with your heart, and then the second draft you write with your mind. That's where you go back and you say, all right, this don't really make sense. Hey, the subject-verb agreement is not really here. This is a fragment. So you can start to put those things together in the second pass. But in that first pass, just get it out, man. Get something out. All right? Main thing is you got to give people time to do reviews and edits. If you send me an email like, hey, so I was wondering if you could take a look at my personal statement. It's due in 3 days. I'm going to tell you, good luck. Good luck. If you understand what my days are like, I probably would not have time to do that. But if you give somebody a 2 weeks time span to review something, they're going to give it a full read. And they're going to carve out time to go through that stuff. Plus, you give yourself a buffer. And no one ever said that you have to give the revised version you can only give it to one person. So what I tend to do is I will flood 4 people that I truly trust and say, hey, you got 2 weeks, give me some edits. And that'll give you an idea of what people think of it. That second draft, though, you got to come through with the knife and start chopping that thing up. You got to whittle it down to something that looks like a little bit more shape, a little bit more form, and it should feel like it flows better. Every draft thereafter is about fine tuning. It's having that engine that you know has horsepower that can really, really rev up something, but you want to make the timing right. You just want to fine tune just a little bit and start thinking about how you can pull out stronger pieces from or use words that make things come alive. So that's what you do in the subsequent drafts. And then finally, you want to have that last draft ready a month in advance before you submit. And that's because at the end of the day, people always go back and be like, I want to read this thing again and change a couple more things. Give yourself some time. But when you submit and submit with a good heart, saying like, you know, I gave this my all, I did it the right thing, did it the right way, and I think they're going to feel it. Feedback. All right. So as you can tell, This picture is the epitome of when people don't appreciate feedback. So here's the thing. In medicine, you got to have tough skin. There's going to be points where people are telling you that you didn't do something right, whether it's a patient, whether it is an attending, whether it is a colleague, whether it is a senior, or someone more senior. And you have to figure out how to take that criticism and use it and incorporate it in a way that makes you better. So don't be mad when that thing comes back to you with more red marks on it. And then literally it looks like somebody came through and tagged it up, right? You have to just embrace it. I've obliterated pages, but I have done it because somebody has obliterated multiple pages of mine. And it made the writing better. You know, the first time I had a statement, I remember I started with something, the dude literally wrote in the margin, "What is this?" Like, what, there wasn't, like, it wasn't, you know, in grade school, in elementary, you learn about how to edit things where they use 3 lines to mean uppercase this and slash to mean lowercase that. And then you circle this and draw a line. Right. It wasn't none of that. It was just, "What is this?" And a line pointing with the arrow. And it was like the whole paragraph. "What is this?" So I took that and it essentially became, it was like 2 words out of it that actually were useful. And he said, that's all you needed to use right there. So sometimes you just write to fill words on a page. And he was like, you're not speaking to anybody. So think about that. Accept the criticism. But the criticism shouldn't just come from people who just read for you know, don't come from a place of authority when they read. You want folks who are good at reading and who can read quick. I don't know if you know anyone in law school. They are the fastest readers I've ever seen in my life. Literally, you give them something, you can 8-9 page document. They've gone through it. They've read it in like 6 minutes. Like how do you read it and retain it? I have no clue. People who are in fields like journalism, if you know someone who is a journalist, have them read your stuff. If you know someone who is in copywriting, meaning they look at stuff and see if the words are the appropriate words to convey an idea, they're great at having read your pieces. And then basically anyone who is in a graduate school program who has to write as a part of the program, they'd be excellent. Major thing that I would say is you want to be selective about what you choose to go with. Just because somebody doesn't agree with what you said in a statement doesn't mean you have to take that advice. You can actually be like, nah, I'm gonna keep this. I like it. So you have a handful of those cards that you can play at all times where your ultimate say goes. And if you like it stylistically, then they're gonna have to love it. And then finally, just be mindful of your timeline in terms of incorporating feedback. How am I on time, guys? Oh, all right. Well, I guess that means I still got time. So I am going to take you guys through a couple examples, right? If everybody has this on their screen, I want to take a minute, however many. So I hate reading, and I've read out loud before. I was one of them dudes that was, you know, the brown dog. Like, that was me. So I understand if you need a little bit more time. So take a second and read this statement. All right, cool. Okay. You guys with me? All right. Let me see if I can change my view for a second. I'm going to start looking at my participants because I'm going to ask somebody to read something. All right. Okay. I can't see names. Sometimes the people, I don't see the name of the people on here if your video is up. It's okay. So I have there's a brother that I have here with a pair of glasses and a full beard. And yep, him. He just smiled. All right. What do you think is wrong with this statement? Give me one thing. Are you able to unmute yourself, or do they have to unmute you? I hear you.
Fairly generalized, I believe. It's nothing very specific.
Excellent. So generalized, not specific. He's saying that this particular statement seems to be very cursory. Okay. I have another person who has, all right, I'm going to go with, has on a white top with black rim, kind of like neckline. And yes, you. Exactly. What's wrong with this statement?
I feel like there are a lot of words that don't need to be in there, just like big words they threw in.
Which ones?
The thought of processing, the ability, like all that doesn't really need to be there. Tremendous internal gratification, that's like 3 words you could use to say, like you could use 1 word to say all that. I don't know, there's a lot of big words that don't need to be there.
Exactly. So the thought of processing the ability to help others, why not just say the ability to help others? Thought of processing, what does that even mean? Right? The thought of processing the ability. What? All right. Tremendous internal gratification. So the thought or the ability to help others, or I find joy in helping others. Extremely concise. This is what people aren't saying is this is a run-on sentence. You see that? Upon considerable reflection, the thought of processing the ability to help others provides me with tremendous internal gratification and offers the feeling that my life's efforts have been focused in a positive direction. It's a long sentence. It's like 4 ideas in there. They could either break them apart or say them concisely. All right. What else? Let me see if I got somebody else who jumped on. All right. All right, so there are 2 people with glasses. One has like a pearl necklace, it looks like on, and maybe a greenish top. Just kind of gave me a grin. Yes, you just adjusted in your seat. Is your microphone working?
Yes.
All right, cool. What do you see in here?
I feel like the beginning, the way they like rephrased the question wasn't very like appealing, or like it didn't connect to the reader's attention.
I agree. So, I mean, it's not really captivating. It's just a regular statement. That's what my man was saying in the beginning. It's just general. And so this is why it's a bad statement for a number of reasons. Yeah, it's just not a good statement. Initially, there was a typo in here, and I don't think I feel like the program self-corrected the typo, but like it was supposed to say physician, becoming a physician was spelled incorrectly. So that was going to be the other thing, that there was a spelling error. All right. Also, improper use of punctuation. Becoming a physician is the culmination of a lifelong dream. Why are we putting, I think this is a colon, right? Colon, the semicolon, one of the 2. And I am prepared to dedicate myself as I have in the past to achieving the goal. There is a complete change in sentence, right? So you can just put a period there, or you can change the sentence to actually make something that is tethered across. So improper use of punctuation. All right, so too vague. Fails to include personal experience. That's why you say it was general. Grammatically unstable or has instability, meaning like the grammar was poor. Spelling error, that was the physician part that was supposed to be there. It doesn't answer any question that I'm asking. It doesn't even give me a reason why they want to be a doctor. It just kind of talks around the subject. And they don't have any examples. So let's contrast that with this one. All right, go ahead and take a read of that. All right. Cool, cool, cool. So I have a young lady in a white top with hair up like this and curls that come down here. Yep, just smiled. Yeah. Is your mic on? You got to, can you use your
Yes,
mic?
yes, we can.
Excellent. What do you like about this, or what do you think is going on with this statement?
Something I like is how they use something that's really like specific and unique, talking about being a farmer's son. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
an experience not everyone would have, and it kind of makes them stand out. But then they were able to like use that to speak on passion and dedication, and then loop that in with like their goal of becoming a physician.
Excellent, excellent. I agree. I do feel like they tethered some of those ideas. That is the layering and anchoring that we spoke about earlier, right? Cool, cool. All right, I'm gonna bring in. I mentioned earlier the men with the tie on and the gingham check. What do you like about this one?
It has a lot of support. So you mentioned supporting your premise.
Yep.
Premise
Yep.
rap is, you know, the ability to be dedicated and work hard.
That's what I'm talking about. So the idea, the premise is that this person knows a hard day's work. I mean, they know how to not only work hard in one capacity because they are the son of a farmer, but also that they worked in a lab, you know, and those days the long days don't deter their desire to do this type of work. So that's good. If I'm reading it, I'm like, all right, so this is somebody I could put in the system, and they're going to go ahead and show me that they're willing to work. Other things that I would just note as examples. Hold on, if I can pull this next one up. Right, so that's Leroy Green. You got the glow. Personal story with context. Excellent. Forms a bridge between their life experience and their interest in medicine. The grammar was right. Spelling errors were all removed. And there's support, like you said. It gives this context of not only am I a hard worker, but I want to do medicine because of these things and these experiences. These are the parts where people make their largest mistakes, all right? Now, this is when we're going to have a real conversation in the next, I think we're going to wrap up shortly. Can someone give me a time check?
I think we're supposed to be done at 12:30.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. I don't remember how many slides left, but I mean, I'm trying to make sure I'm staying within the time frame. So, common pitfalls. The main thing here is you can't use the same narratives that everybody else is using. Now, if it is your story, please, do your thing. I'm gonna give you a couple examples of common or cliche things, right? So almost everybody has written a narrative where it's like, my aunt Sue, had breast cancer, and seeing her go through the treatment cycles made me want to be a doctor. Now, that is a very real experience, and I trust that it is impactful to people. But unless your relationship with Aunt Sue was so great that it caused you to write an entire statement about it, then that to me is a not so great association. And it sounds like multiple other people's statements. Ways that changes is if Aunt Sue is the person who taught you the periodic table of elements, she introduced you to science, and then she passes because of a medical issue. The story arc changes, right? Other things that I would not necessarily recommend. There was a period in time where everybody was writing about House. I watched the episode of House. I watched the episode of ER. I watched the episode of Real Lives of this, and it made me want to be a doctor. Doctors hate seeing that. Surprise. We don't like that. So if it is what made you want to be a doctor, save that for casual conversation, because it's more fun to express that in that environment rather than in writing. Because all we're going to say is, what other TV shows could you have watched? Is that not going to make you want to be a lawyer because you watched, Perry Mason? Is that going to make you want to be a crime scene investigator because you watched SVU? Like, you got to be able to differentiate reasons why. And then finally, personal drama, right? So you can always, everybody got drama. everybody has such situations in their life that, you know, may have driven them. But if your personal drama is just like ugly, messy drama, and you're more so giving me Real Housewives slash, you know, love and hip hop vibe from your story, I'm gonna be like, yo, this is a lot, and I'm probably gonna stop reading. Okay, so don't be cliche. Second part, man, that spell check button is there for a reason, y'all. I know you think that you probably are, you know, a scripts champion, but in real life, we have spell. Those of you that don't know what scripts is the spelling bee competition that happens every year. So that's scripts, but except for this year. But the spelling is important. If I find a spelling error or a grammatical error or the improper use of homophones, that probably is going to bother me. It seems to be a pet peeve for a lot of people, but know the difference between like the different there, and theirs, right? You should know that and use it appropriately. Second is grammatical errors. So subject verb agreement is huge. Fragments. You can use fragments, but it's just, how are you using it? Is it an emphatic statement? Like, know how to do that. The use of starting sentences with and, but, you can do that too, but you have to be savvy enough of a writer to make sure that it's done well, and you don't do it often. And then finally, tone, making sure that your tone is not just like this kind of, I call it passive tone, but it almost feels like everything is a question. Like, it's like, I may do this. I may be able to, da, 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 da. Like, if I was able to do that, like, just say it. Just say the statement in a way that is affirmative, because otherwise, if you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it. Vernacular. I know that people love to say I'm a doctor, but there are lots of doctors, right? You can be a doctor of philosophy. You can be a doctor of sociology. And if you tell me I want to be a doctor, I'm going to be like, okay. But you say physician, I know exactly what type you're speaking about. So I would change my language to say physician whenever speaking about medical doctors. And then finally, your vocabulary is something that I notice off the bat. When I talk to people, I understand their vocabulary. And here's the secret. You grow your vocabulary by reading more. Right? When you read the way that the words are used. Like, there's a word, zeitgeist. Has anybody ever heard of it? Used it? When I hear someone use zeitgeist appropriately, I'm like, oh my God. It is a hard word to weave in. Or aegis. Under the aegis of doing something. Like, there are words that we have that are used to literally make the statement that you're trying to make perfectly. You just have to do the digging. So think about increasing your vocabulary by reading and seeing how other authors are using some of those words. Lying. Please don't lie. This is what we call capping. Don't be capping in your statement. I promise you, we'll find out, and I'm going to ask in real time. I'm going to say, oh, so you led a troop of people into Ecuador, and that's where you had to win. And so you speak Spanish. Okay, and then I started doing the interview in Spanish, and there's a problem. So don't lie. All right. And then I would say, just be timely with your submissions, y'all. Don't waste time. So this is Misty Copeland on the side over here. If you ever get a chance, ever in the future, maybe when they open outside again, to see her, you should. So here's like an exercise that I would do at home when you're starting to do it. This is how you can start to build the anatomy of your statement. You write down a premise. Make the premise strong. Try to be concise. You write down an anchor. So that is one thing, one trait, one quality that you are going to try to connect the premise to. Then you give me 3 pivot points. Those are the things that you're going to see in your story, in your narrative, that shift and change the position. And then you write 1 boomerang sentence, something that arcs back to what you're doing. So I'm going to give you guys some of my statement. How much time do we have, y'all? Soften it. Well,
You have 15.
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Great. So I'll whittle this down, right? So usually between the two talks, I give a little bit of perspective about why I'm qualified to talk about this stuff, right? Now, it's hard to talk about sometimes because, again, as I said, it might be triggering for some. Every time I give this conversation, I feel a little bit of transference or rather counter-transference. So I'm one of those guys that spend a lot of time working on personal statements because I applied to medical school a lot of times, and I've received a lot of rejections. So, I was the type of student that in high school, everything was pretty natural to me. Like I could go to sleep the night before a test, the morning of the test, read the material, go into the test and kill the test. I was that type of student, and it was an ability, and I leaned on that ability all the way into college. And I got to college, and I just remember saying to myself, like, I'm at Morehouse, man. These are intelligent people, but I belong here, and so we're going to use those same tactics. I walked into tests. I remember taking this biology exam, and everybody had been studying their tails off. Of course, me thinking I could just use like a couple of days, get the material, go in and kill the test. That's not what happened. We all went in there, took this test, and everybody's head was hung low when we exited the test. And I remember looking at the first question and feeling essentially like I felt like I was in a title fight. And if you've seen old Mike Tyson and new Mike Tyson and how hard he hits, that's how these questions were hitting me. So I just remember going one after another, catching Mike Tyson jabs, and literally feeling like if I just make it to the end of this, the first thing I'm going to do is cry. The second thing I'm going to do is sleep. And I remember getting the score results, and everybody was like, man, that test was hard, but I barely passed and that stuff. I looked at my score results, and I was like, I got like a 36 or something. Right. And so I said, dude, this ain't me. So, you go to look at yourself in the mirror, and you're like, come on, Italo. You start talking to yourself and hyping yourself back up. And I took the test, the next test, that midterm, I failed the midterm, got like 3 points higher. It was like a 39. And it set in very quickly to me that I was definitely not, the tactics that I had been using were not going to be the same, or were not going to be effective. And I really just hit one hurdle after another through my entire college career at Morehouse. I ended up failing a 1 credit lab and was notified about it days before my graduation. So my whole family is down in Atlanta, Georgia, expecting me to graduate with my 2.7 GPA. And I failed this 1 credit lab. And they tell me, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to walk with your class. This is already after losing an academic scholarship. This is already after having to repeat 3 different classes, physiology, biochem, physiology lab. And I finished feeling low. Somehow I got into School of Public Health, and I thought I was going to continue doing those same things, same tactics. And in that first year, I think I spent more time at my friends' houses than I spent actually studying and writing. The only saving grace for me in grad school was the fact that most of our classes were lecture-based, and my ideas would come across well in lecture. And so I could defend what I said well, but the evidence on exams, on those biostats tests was not coming through. Then one day I got snatched out of class. Now, in grad school, I am a grown man at this point. I am of voting age, smoking age, drinking age, any age that allows you to say that you are grown. I paid taxes, and somebody came and asked me to step out of class, and it was a lady by the name of Nagina Lithcott. So Dr. Lithcott was the assistant dean at Boston University School of Public Health. And she sat me down in a room, had me close the door. Her room was massive, looked like an Ivy League personal office, and leather-bound chairs with books that cascaded from the ceilings. And she looked me in the eyes and said, "What the F are you doing?" And I said, well, hold on now. You can't talk to me like that. Like, we're adults. You're not gonna cuss at me. But, you know, she, in saying that, it was like that rude awakening. It was the blanching of my soul. It was the shock factor that let me know that this was not a game. And she said, you have so much talent and ability and you're wasting it. You're squandering it all. So she said, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you in a way that no one has helped other people at this school before, and in a way that when I was your age, I wish somebody would have helped me. She sat me down. She said, I'm going to give you a scholarship. I'm going to give you a retroactive and a proactive scholarship. And she said, I'm going to give you study guides, study aids. I'm going to give you a teaching aid assistant or whatever to help you. We're going to figure out how you learn and deconstruct that. I'm going to build you a sleep schedule. I'm going to build you a work schedule. Like, she did all those things with me. And out of that relationship, I felt like somebody cared and somebody actually believed what I had been believing about myself for the longest. I was able to correct my grade point average. I eventually took the MCAT multiple times. I took it 3 times. And the first 2 times I took it in college in the first year. Then she had this, you know, come to Jesus moment with me. And then my scores jumped by 10 points. So I know the scores have shifted now to a 3-digit number. But imagine going for something that was sub 500 to something that was over 500, right? And then I re-enrolled at Harvard to pick up those classes that I did poorly on, did well in those classes. And despite all of those things, I was feeling good about myself. I understood how I learned now. I applied 60 different schools and got 60 different rejection letters. Cycle 1. I reapplied the next year, 66 schools, 66 rejection letters. And the final time I applied to 13 programs, a mixture of regular programs and post-bac programs. One school, a post-bac program, asked me to come down for an interview. I went in there looking sharp, thought I killed the interview. They told me I didn't, and I was rejected from all 13 different programs. And then at this point, I was like, it's not going to work out. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I really wanted to be a physician. I got on a plane to go to a wedding, and the plane would not take off. And I was like, wondering, why is this plane not taking off? Because I'm crying. And you know, when you sit on a plane and people sit next to you and you in your feelings, you have those Drake moments where it's like you're looking out the window and like life is trying to make sense and stuff. And like one solitary tear, that was exactly how I was in that seat. And I was just like, plane, please take off so everyone can go to sleep and I could cry in the corner. Plane wouldn't take off. They asked us, it was a mechanical issue. We all had to get off the plane. When I got off the plane, my phone rings. I answered the phone. And she said, hello, can I speak to Italo? I was like, this is Italo. She's like, this is Dean Pamela Williams at Meharry Medical College. How are you? I'm all right. You know, slightly, you know, trying to suck up the tears now. And she's like, we have a post-bac program. We have a slot open. I'd love to know if you'd like to come down and be a part of it. And so before she finished saying a part of it, I was like, yes. It was a Thursday when this happened. The class started on Monday. So I went to the wedding. I quit my job while at a wedding. I got permission from the program to give me 1 week. I flew back to Boston. I packed my bags up into 2 suitcases. I got back on another plane. I flew down to Nashville. I lived in a hotel for 2.5 weeks. I lived at the dorms on the campus of Fisk for 2 months. And I went to class every day and eventually worked so hard that they gave me a scholarship for the whole post-bac program. And then I matriculated, never having to take the MCAT again, directly into Meharry Medical College. So I sit before you today as a guy who has had well over 128 rejections for medical school, failed the MCAT twice, never received a medical school interview, and I'm an assistant professor at Stanford. So I'm telling you that if you all can write your narrative and own your narratives and own your failures, you have the ability to do exactly the same, if not way better. All right. So that is how I bring it to a resounding close. Tell your narrative as it relates to your interest in medicine. I gave you a story about failures. I gave you a story about false starts. This is exactly what I see in the emergency department all the time. I deal with people who are struggling. Why else would I not? Why would I be there? I would be there because I know they need somebody who understands that, and I do. And then you use the revision process to scope your statement. How many times do you think I told this story? There are at least 3 podcasts in the interview that are floating around right now with almost every single element of what I said. And I've given this same lecture 3 other times. Craft the story, planning then time it appropriately, manage it appropriately. It took time to come up with these narratives. I had to go through every single emotion and be very targeted how I tell it. And then you submit and prepare for the interview. You guys got any questions?
Dr. Brown?
Yep.
Thank you. That is exactly why PMF wanted to do this workshop. And you have been amazing, not only with this one, but on the previous ones. I would like to add a couple of other things to your statements. Not only is your personal statements for medical school, but also for scholarships, as you so well mentioned. I sit on the committee of awards for a major national scholarship organization. And I read a lot of the personal statements that they submit, and you can just know who's going to get the scholarship.
That's right.
Who's not going to get the scholarship. The other thing that happens is when people send their attachments, and then in the email, many of them forget the name. The subject lines are not good. So when you are a doctor or an administrator and you don't put and you got a lot of emails and stuff coming at you, the email that has all of that good information, your name, your contact, a good subject line, please know that it is important. On this particular program alone, I've got many questions where somebody just sends me one statement. So when is it going to start? No name, no nothing. So you guys, please pay attention. You are always on Showtime, as he said. It is important not only for applying for medical school, but also for those scholarships. That is really, really, really key. And with that, I want to thank you. And now we can go into questions. Okay. So we have a question from Jonah. For personal goals in the personal statements, should you be specific in your occupation pursuit or be more broad?
I'm going to answer that by saying that it's really up to you. I will say that people like specifics in medicine. Like we are an empirical group of people. Like we love to have evidence and direction and give me the answer. So if you are specific, that is also good. But in terms of being broad, I will say that you basically need to know that if you're broad, qualify why you're broad. Like qualify. I'll give you an example. If you're saying that I feel like if your whole premise is around blending healthcare and technology to improve health outcomes, and you can't tell me the app that you're trying to build because you haven't thought of it yet, that's okay. Like, I don't want you to be like, yeah, I plan on building a specific app. Like if you don't have it all thought out and you don't want to give up the idea, you don't have to be specific there, but you can absolutely talk about the impact that technology has on health and the fact that you see it and how your knowledge and ability to navigate that makes you better at doing both. So you can be very general. The specific part I would say that helps is when you're saying things like, if you are passionate about one particular facet or subset of medicine, like some people love research. That is a good time to be specific. If you're someone who's been doing some type of research or you have a research mentor, be specific. They want to see that. If you're somebody who is like, I met someone who was this type of physician and they let me do certain things in shadowing them, Great time to be specific about an aim. It's like, I want to be an orthopedist because when I was a young person, I had this injury. I developed a relationship with my orthopedist. And then when I got older, I shadowed that orthopedist and I learned about how to do this and that and the other. Great time to be specific. So I would say you could play either way. You just have to kind of think about it from the context of what you're trying to convey ultimately.
Okay, another question. When it comes to reading, is nonfiction or fiction better? And this is, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, from Sabira.
Sorry, it's Sabira.
Sabira. Okay, thank you.
All right, Sabira. So, all right, this is where I got to be transparent. I don't read a lot of fiction, but that doesn't mean that reading fiction is bad. In fact, I think that now more than ever, fiction reading is not only super popular, but it gives you so many different collaterals in terms of like things you can talk about. I feel like fiction is better at telling stories than nonfiction, obviously. So you can learn about how to craft and create and take a reader through something. The other thing about nonfiction is there is a huge subculture of people who read there's a culture around fiction readers. So fantasy, whatever, there's a huge culture around it. And the chances that you're going to cross paths with somebody who is a fiction reader is high. So I almost say from two senses, it makes sense to read fiction. One, because you learn how to write stories better from fiction writers. Two, because you're going to remember what you read and what you wrote, and you might be able to reference it later in an interview or in a conversation with somebody, and it gives you another overlapping point. So I do think that fiction reading is good. Now, why I say nonfiction is like the golden standard for this, it's because you need to read about other people's life stories. You need to read about like very hard-hitting editorial and op-eds. The way people structure things is different than in a fantasy book. A fantasy book, most of the time you can get away with just telling the story. You don't have to follow all the grammatical rules. When you read an op-ed, to get published in the New York Times, it has to follow a certain structure. To get published in the Atlantic, has to follow a certain structure. Washington Post, LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle, all of these have requirements, and the editors are a lot more rigorous than in a fantasy setting. I can write a fantasy. I mean, this is not to be like, I have one of my best friends. His name is Alaron Kong. You can look him up. He was an internal medicine physician, trained at Morehouse and trained at Grady, and quit his job as a physician to be a fantasy writer. He writes fantasy novels and is the only Black dude in his specific field of fantasy. Only Black dude doing this particular type of fantasy writing. I watched him write his books while he was on call. I say that to say his ability to craft a story is great, but I'm not going to see his stuff published in the New York Times. And when he wrote that personal statement, he wasn't writing fantasy. I will tell you that there is an ability to do both. His creative mind is always going to be great, but he will also champion, and this is because this is a guy that I know very well, he would champion the fact that he reads way more nonfiction than he reads fiction. So I think that there's a value in doing both.
By the way, their comments are wonderful, you guys. Thank you for them. I have another question from Valerie. It says, I have a pre-med friend who found out she has epilepsy while applying to medical school. Should she mention this in her personal statement? Would it hurt her?
Oh, this is a tough question.
And let me add to that so you can do them both together. There's another one from Nyla, I think it is. If a person with mental health issues wanted to become a therapist, would it be cliche for them to talk about their struggles in a personal essay? So these are both related to the person having some kind of health issue.
Got it.
In terms of how far do you go? Where do you go? Where is the boundary lines for that?
All right. So the reason why these are sensitive issues is because both of those particular spheres of illness or of condition, I would say that, not necessarily illness, those spheres of conditions have stigma, right? Mm-hmm. So mental health stigma still is pretty strong. And I think that it's hard for people to understand the full scope of certain mental illnesses or mental health issue or wellness as it relates to a candidate. I'm not saying, I am going to outright say, if you write about a mental health issue, please give it context, make it contextual, make sure that you are talking about how it does not hinder you. Like, you can share that information, but know that once it's on page, once it is in somebody's hands, they can potentially discriminate against you or subconsciously have a bias against candidates who convey this information. So I'd be very careful about sharing information about mental health issues only because it is stigmatized heavily in our field. With the second part, seizure or epilepsy is, oh man. So the reason why I would say, like, so I've had colleagues, when I was in residency, one of the sharpest physicians that I knew, she had epilepsy. She had a seizure while we was on shift one time. But the point is, she was a physician. So if that tells you anything, it's not something that should stop someone from selecting you as a physician. So epilepsy to me is not as stigmatized. What I will say is you gotta give context for that too, because what you don't want it to come across as is, I have seizure disorder, and as a student or as a doctor, I might have a seizure at any moment. Like, you have to use words like, I had seizures when I was a child, and ever since then they've become well controlled, but understanding this has made me want to become a neurologist, and right? You give context to it. And with the mental health stuff, I would say, if you are talking about overcoming something like grief, something like trauma, violence, like exposure to violence, these mental health areas are actually looked upon favorably in statements, as opposed to saying like, hey, I have, schizophrenia. Like, that is something that most people reading it will be like, red flag. So be aware that although your desire to share it and share that part of your narrative may be earnest, may be really sincere, it may not be the best thing to share or anchor your story around. You got to sometimes think a little bit more so in a political way, or in a way that gives you your best fighting chance to get selected.
So well put. There is, in addition to supporting what Dr. Brown has said, you guys may see the message from Dr. Carol Miller regarding some compelling things about personal statements and others, so be sure to read that. The other thing is, let's see, another question had to do with mentorship. And I think this was from Aaliyah. Where should I start looking for a mentor? And after your response, Dr. Brown, I have a couple of things I'd add to that too, regarding mentorships.
Okay, so mentors are, in my opinion, right now at the access to mentors, the threshold to find one is an all-time low, meaning people are available more so than they've ever been before because of COVID-19, right? So a lot of people have more time and are being brought closer to the need for mentorship, because that has been the largest thing for a long time, is getting our mentors to understand that, like, we're having a growing population of people who want to do this stuff, and that there is not enough available people around to give insight. So take advantage of that. Now, you're saying, where do you find them from? Well, there's a couple traditional routes. The first way I would say, obviously, is to think about the different touch points you've had with healthcare. So your personal physician, family members who know physicians personally, people who have, like, family friends that are physicians. If you have no one in your family that is a physician, you can always go to the next rung and look at a family friend. The second way is, if you know an existing medical student, and say, who is your mentor? Would they be interested in mentoring me? Would they be interested in talking to me? Shoot them an email, right? The third way that I'd say is, there are organizations that right now are basically, you know, when you see like a semi-annual sale at a store, it's like everything must go. Right now, there are organizations that are treating mentorship like a semi-annual sale. They are finding and connecting people like nobody's business with mentors because they understand how this disproportionately puts candidates who come from underrepresented backgrounds in medicine at a disadvantage, because our traditional ways of getting mentors are all kind of blocked up. You can't see them anymore. So now you have to work overtime to connect people with folks who are willing to give that type of guided advice, guidance and advisement. With that said, the SNMA has a junior version, like a pre-medical version, that I think would be beneficial for you all to look into if you are college students, or if you're like any pre-medical, you can look into that section and then ask for mentorship. Then if you have a specialty that you're specifically interested in, usually they have mentorship organizations already established around that. Like I know I'm in emergency medicine. We have AAEM, SAEM, we have all these different groups that have pre-medical ties, and they build vertical mentorship streams. So I think that those are the ways that I would approach it. And then the last way is cold call, cold email. You can Google somebody and be like, hey, I saw you, you were on this article. I was wondering if you were able to have a conversation for 5 minutes via Zoom, or listen to me talk about questions that I have around your field. I'd love to find out more about what you do. Send it off, shoot your shot. At this point, you have nothing to lose, literally. So I would recommend doing that.
That is great. And might I add that it is also in your search to find a good mentor. Physicians Medical Forum is really a good place to start, but also it is very important, and we go through this in our program about being a good mentee, because sometimes you find a good mentor and then you don't follow up with that mentor, or you don't do your part to make sure that their time, their valuable time to support you is appreciated. And I want to be really clear about that, because that is so important. I hear it often from physicians, from educators, that it is so important. And please echo that out to students to take care and do due diligence when they ask for us.
I'm just sipping my tea, because what you are saying, this is the red letter text in the Bible. Right. You are speaking the gospel.
Yes. Okay, and then we have a question from Holden. And Holden's question is, as an older aspirant, I find it slightly difficult to hone in on the best topics to include in my personal statements, drafts, okay? Are there any suggestions on what to include or not include, and how to decide what experiences would be suitable for an older medical aspirant?
Holden,
yeah,
this is a fantastic question, and I first and foremost commend you for bringing that to the forefront. We have a lot of non-traditional students probably on this thread, and they are seeking some of the same questions that you have, and it's easy to get lost in the shuffle because one, you know, having the desire to do something in mid-career or later in your young career is hard to navigate. Like, it's not a whole lot of people doing this stuff. I want to share with you one quick story. My buddy from college, this is just like, I'm looking at you when I'm talking to you about this, even though I know there's other people on here. Buddy from college, we both went to Morehouse College 2002. His name is Jamil Lacey. Jamil Lacey and I are good friends. He's from Oakland, born and raised, looked like Slim from 112. And, you know, he initially started out as a biology major, and then switched his major, and then ended up leaving Morehouse. He went to school in London for a little bit, did some urban planning. He ended up graduating from like NYU at some point, or went to NYU for some point of his career, and then came back to Morehouse probably 2 years after I graduated, and just finished his degree. And then while he started going to urban planning, he realized, he was like, man, I keep finding out these problems, and these problems are all boiling down to health issues. And he was like, what is going on? So he started working as a teacher, just just standard teacher in schools. and started seeing that his kids didn't have safe places to go home to, and it affected their learning. He started seeing that these kids' health were impacted because they had parents that didn't have like the full understanding of their health issues, and he started just taking these things on. He began a group called Trap Medicine, where he started having barbershop-based health interventions, where he talked to Black men and boys about health issues and topics. And then it turned into grant funding, and then it turned into partnerships. And then next thing you knew, he grew this entire engine around trying to support the lives of Black men and boys. And then he said, I think I want to be a doctor. So at the age of 36, he applied to medical school, or 35, he applied to medical school. Well, let me rephrase. At the age of 35, he took the MCAT. He didn't do as well as he wanted to. He did it again. 36, he applied to medical school. He got accepted to probably like 4 or 5 medical schools. I want to tell you that 3 medical schools offered him full tuition scholarships. He's at UCLA Drew on a full scholarship as a 36-year-old candidate. He gave the white coat speech a month ago. So I hear what you're saying about coming at this as an older adult, but these are the things that being an older adult in this game affords you: perspective. If Jamil hadn't lived all them different lives, he wouldn't know the full spectrum and scope of what he was trying to accomplish. It gives you experience. He had several jobs by that time, enough jobs to find out certain things that he can extract and say, I want to use this to build in my statement. It also gives you friends. He just called me. I'll tell you what you should write. He had so many friends that were built-in, baked-in mentors and people who had done it, who said, hey man, I remember when I did this, don't do that. So you've lived long enough for the people to go through the first pass of the gauntlet and tell you, duck now, jump over this, here comes the spike, watch out for this swinging thing. You have enough people in your circle who've done this to give you expert advice so you can come through that thing and just do the Watusi all the way down the gauntlet. And at the end of it, you are more, I would say, you're more apt to be a adult learner, because that's the biggest hurdle for most people going into medical school, is making the transition from being just, a college learner and kind of do my thing to being an adult learner, where you have to build your own schedule and study and hold yourself responsible for things. You know what that's like already. All right. And that's what they want to see and hear about. So I hear you when you say it's hard to come up with those narratives and those things, but I'm telling you, you have so much material. All you have to do is sit down and look at your life and say, what is the point that I'm trying to make on the back end? And go back and start extracting little things and nuggets and just align them. And then when you get to them in front of them to tell them these things, then you use all the full picture to kind of paint it for them, okay? Hopefully that gives you some information.
Thank you. Thank you again, Dr. Brown. And I just want to also thank Dr. Miller for her continuous response, so you can take a break because she's helped answering some of the questions in the more extensive way.
I appreciate that so much.
Yes, it's very helpful, especially the question from Dorian regarding admissions panels and so forth, because he can't answer all the questions, but we're trying our best. Okay, so I think that this wraps up this particular part of the personal statement. Again, thank you for all of your wonderful comments, your questions and your responses. Italo, they love you. It's really, really good.
I love them too.
Yes. So let's take a break till what, 1 o'clock, give you a chance to kind of grab something to eat and refresh yourself, a little bit of water or whatever you need, and we'll come back exactly at 1 o'clock. Is that okay? All right. Thank you. All right.